Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. We're here to answer your questions about starting businesses, building businesses, and the meaning of life. We have a panel of experienced founders and investors who have dozens of years of experience to bring to bear to answer all these questions about every part of building your business. My name is Sean Burns. I've been a founder of companies for about 20 years. I recently moved over to the other side. I'm an investor in companies near Horizon, a new firm I set up last year. And I'm joined on our panel of illustrious hosts by Ash and Nick.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ash Rust, and I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. I mostly invest in B2B companies based in the US and UK at the idea stage through my fund, Sterling Road. I've also worked at places like Trinity Ventures and Bullpen Capital as an advisor. Before investing, I was an entrepreneur myself, most notably an early employee at the social media analysis company Clout, as well as the co-founder and CEO of CentUp. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders, and I've helped more than 1,500 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I'm co-founder and CEO of Navi. Our thesis is that the skills that make the best founders are the same skills that every person and organization needs to succeed in the world of tomorrow. Our tools help them make the innovation magic happen. I've supported hundreds of startups and folks on their innovation quests, and I subscribe to Sean's newsletter and Ash's newsletter, respectively. So you can consider me a fan. Oh, yeah. I'm a fan of principled company building.
Actually, we have a reunion for my newsletter. It's in a phone booth every quarter. You should come, Nick.
Oh, is that so? You can count me in.
But we're not in the newsletter business here. We're in the podcasting business, and we're here to answer questions that were submitted by founders in the audience. And so if you have a question about your company, building it, starting it, whatever you'd like to ask, please let us know. Our website is thestartuphelpdesk.com. Our Twitter/X handle is thestartuphd. We would love to answer your questions in a future episode, so please submit them. Today, we have a series of questions all about annual planning. So most businesses need an annual plan, at least, maybe the beginnings of an annual plan to know what is your goal for next year. We're recording this towards the end of 2024. Lots of companies are doing annual planning, I'm sure. So let's dive into questions about annual planning. But before that, I have a question for Nick and Ash that I was thinking of as we were setting up. I remember when I was first a CEO, I started my first company, and the board told me I needed to present an annual plan, and I had never seen one before, and I had no idea what it looked like, and I didn't know how to ask for one because I was embarrassed. How did you guys first get introduced to annual plans?
The thing that I had done was very regularly sending monthly investor reports. So every month we would send an investor report. When it came time for annual planning, essentially I just sent a longer monthly email than typical. And so I wouldn't say that was necessarily the most thoughtful strategy. I just assumed, all right, this is a 12-month plan, so send a longer email and we're in. I wouldn't suggest that as the go-to tactic, though.
My story is actually fairly similar. I had no idea, so I asked our COO, who was a lawyer by trade, to produce one. And he produced something that was like 8 tabs of on a spreadsheet. And then basically we cut it down until I understood what it said. And that was our first annual plan.
I love it.
Yeah, Sean, how's that match yours?
It was similar. I eventually did break it down and say, I know what an annual plan looks like, but just why don't you show me what you think an annual plan looks like?
Prove to me you have a good annual plan template.
That's good.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's jump into the questions that we have been submitted. So the first question up, other than revenue targets, what other things should we include as goals for our annual plans? Hey, this is a good one to get started. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, so Ash, I got a feeling that you likely have an annual planning playbook or something similar to share on that front. And so I wanted to address this by thinking about something that comes even pre that process. Ultimately, for a startup, you got to just figure out where are we? And I think you can break this into 3 categories. For a pre-revenue startup, your goal is to start growing. And so your annual plan needs to have targets that support that. For a startup that's already validated demand, the goal is to accelerate growth. And so in this case, you want ambitious revenue targets that support that accelerated growth. And then the third piece of this is for a startup that recognizes that something critical is not working, you need to ultimately reevaluate your hypothesis, and the goals need to be designed to validate that next major hypothesis. So I bring that framing up because the annual plan needs to be grounded in the reality for your startup. So start there by figuring out which of those three things apply and then build your plan accordingly. And then, of course, revenue is a fantastic target to include in these goals. And you likely want to build incremental milestones to drive towards that revenue that are not just sales related. So that's my first take on this. Ash, what's your read on it?
Yeah, I like revenue as the centerpiece, no question. But within that, I like to think about distribution, engagement, and churn as the three pillars of your revenue. You have to get new customers, you have to engage them, they have to pay, and then you have to avoid as many of them as possible from leaving. Around that, you have these other characteristics, as you mentioned, like runway, budget, hiring, those kinds of things. And then a lot of people like to set launch dates for big features as their goal. But the most important part about this is that all these lower level goals, from distribution, engagement, hiring, launch of new features, all of them have to be clearly impacting a higher level goal, the revenue goal. So don't agree on a launch date or a feature that you want to ship unless you have a specific amount of revenue you're expecting to come from that. And that's the most important playbook element of the annual planning from my perspective in terms of setting the targets.
That brings up an interesting question. So I have always thought, I've seen lots of annual plans over the years now. And one of the ways that I always know that this annual plan I've just been given is bad and we have to try again is when it has just countless goals, like pages and pages of targets and goals in it. Because in my opinion is like, you're basically, if you have dozens and dozens of targets, you don't have any targets. You just have way too much going on.
Completely agree.
What do you guys look at? If somebody brings you an annual, Ash, I'm sure you get brought annual plans all the time as an investor. What do you look for? Do you look for similar things, or what are like the telltale signs that this is a bad annual plan and let's try again?
Yeah, I think the key difference here is if you have a list of goals that is pages long and they're all roughly of the same kind of priority, then that is a terrible plan. What you want is to have one big goal and then all the various different jigsaw pieces that are going to make that goal happen. And so there are many sub-goals. If you want to triple your revenue over the next 12 months, you're going to have to drastically increase your distribution. Someone's going to have to be responsible for that. They're probably going to have sub-goals for their team members within that. And that's how I like to think about it. So there are going to be lots and lots of goals for a company in order to reach this one large goal, but it's got to be a pyramid.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I think the other piece to add to this too is very regularly people define a goal and don't necessarily identify what's stopping them from achieving that goal currently. And so the other piece that I love to see is what are the current obstacles that are stopping you from being able to achieve that goal? So for instance, if you want to triple revenue, then fantastic. What's stopping you from doing that today? And it'd be ideal to see in the annual plan just a recognition of what those obstacles are, because then you can actually measure, are we on the right track in terms of eliminating those obstacles in the intermediate steps to achieve said goal.
But look, Nick, let's say you're a panelist on a podcast and you tell really bad jokes. Would you kind of get to whatever that?
Say you do it all the time.
So you're saying you get to the obstacle that's keeping you from telling good jokes. That's what you would do?
That's 100% it. I think that we have a live.
I think you should start with some customer discovery, just a suggestion.
Yeah, that's always the key. That's so true. Man. You know, one thing I do want to add though here is there's a couple things that people often overlook as things to consider during this annual planning time. And so very regularly people are so forward looking. I would say, number one, make sure to actually document and properly recap the year behind. So what happened this year? Document it. Because in this case, it could be something that's celebratory or it can be elucidating in terms of understanding the problems. So document, and then also make sure you update your list of what I call champions. These are the folks that either are investors, folks that are rooting for you, want to see you succeed. Make sure that you just have a literal list of who they are so you know to keep them engaged, because ultimately these are the folks that can provide some serendipitous moments and open some new doors as you embark on these next steps.
No, Nick. It's much funnier when Bob shows up and Bob's like, where's the annual plan? And be like, oh, Bob, we forgot to send it to you. Sorry, we've already approved it. It's too late. That's much.
But Bob, there's always next year. There's always next year for Bob.
Okay. Let's make sure we get through more than one question. I mean, annual planning is big, and we have a lot going on. What else do we have on the queue, Ash?
It's a big subject. Okay, so next question. We have an ambitious goal for next year, but our team can't agree on how to hit it. Marketing says we need better sales performance, and sales says we need better marketing. How do I get the entire team committed to a plan? Parenthetical, who's getting fired?
Yeah. Everybody raise your hand if you've heard this before. Hey, everybody's hand went up. Amazing. This is the end.
Number of times your ambitious salesperson is going to march into a founder's office and say, marketing is screwing me. I have goals. Oh my word. I don't know any, even if you have a well-functioning, healthy team, this is the kind of tension that always exists in annual planning. I'll start off by saying that generally speaking, every company, if you have ambitious goals, you need marketing to do better and you need sales to do better. Everybody has to do better. It's not a question of better. It's a question of like, is anybody actually structurally holding back your growth, right? Are there structural parts of the sales process that have to improve? Are there structural parts of marketing that have to improve? And by the way, maybe product, like maybe our product delivery roadmap or velocity isn't high enough. You have to think about all the underlying root causes and drivers of growth. I think Ash talked about that in terms of goal setting, but let's think about those drivers and say, okay, really, is one of our functions holding back the rest of the engine? Sometimes it actually is true. Sometimes it is true that we need better performance from somebody, but that isn't because they're pointing fingers. It's because we've actually done the analysis and figured it out. Almost every sales team would rather have marketing give them more free leads, and every marketing team would like sales to turn every lead into a customer. So the question really is those fundamental building blocks, the number of leads that you get, the size of your pipeline, the conversion rates that you have. Let's make sure as we scale up, there aren't parts of that equation that are going to hold us back. And if there are, then somebody's performance does have to improve. And to Ash's point, we probably do need to make a change as part of our annual plan. Nick, what do you think, man? Well, Sean, are you saying that you basically need to train sales and marketing to hate the product team as well?
No, the good news, Ash, is you don't have to train them. They already do hate the product team. No training required. Everybody already hates each other. It is a sad state of affairs that it is easier to point fingers at other people than solve your own problems. The best leaders I've ever had don't point fingers. They just have what they have in front of them and they do their best to hit their goals with the tools they have. But they will also hint when they feel like there might be some strategic issue somewhere else. The worst leaders are the ones who spend all the time pointing fingers at everybody else.
You know, just to move outside of tech for a moment, many, many moons ago, like 150 years ago, I was in the military, and one of the officers that was revered... That
was a threat, Nick. Be careful.
Yes,
that was a threat.
Merlionis. Any more politics from you? Anyway, so the officer that was revered in our small regiment who had recently left was the kind of person where you went to him with a problem and he said, okay, you do the best that you can and I'll figure it out from there. And that was something that people could just always stand on. And it was never about pointing fingers. It was always like, you do your best and I'll do my very best in return. And I think that really is leadership.
That's exceptional. I think it gets at the heart of this challenge from this founder here, because this is a question about the psychology of motivation for teams. It's also why this question is so challenging. Ultimately, it boils down to what are the best methods to get unified alignment on a goal. And so, of course, there's a level of salesmanship and just motivation around this piece. I think the one other flavor to incorporate in here is to make sure that you are framing this effectively. Number one, it's an ambitious goal, which means the only way to achieve it is to have everybody hard charging towards it. The second thing about it too is if we knew the answer, then this would be so much easier. You wouldn't really need to, we could eliminate all doubt, but we don't. And so in this case, the goal, we have a hypothesis about how to get there. And so in order to unify both sales, marketing, product around this goal, I like to just think about framing it around, we are testing major assumptions about our ability to accelerate and improve in some meaningful way. And so in short, if you can frame it around, we're testing assumptions and we're doing so at a rapid pace for an ambitious goal, I find that to be much more effective than saying, here's the goal, now go do the work. Because that often leads to people pointing at others and saying, no, you go do the work.
Well, that actually brings up a good point, Nick. And Ash, actually, your military experience might be useful here, which is, let's say you have your team disagreeing.
It's probably not useful.
But you come up with a plan. Like, is the play then to tell everybody, just get in line and follow orders? This is our plan. Or do you need to sell it on them and get them to buy in? Like, do they have agency? Do they need to accept the plan? Or do you just give them the plan and it's their job to accept it?
Well, yeah, any plan that you give people and you expect instant consensus, you're going to about to be rudely awakened. And that doesn't matter what environment you're in. I think when you're in a military environment, that's going to be, you might be able to force the issue, but you need people to be motivated and determined. And in tech, that's about, driving the urgency, having the shared goals. And yeah, I mean, telling people what to do rather than giving them the opportunity to provide feedback and improve on it, and assuming that your plan is the very best plan, that's both foolish and going to lead you to a bad outcome.
Also, I'll say that it's better to sparingly move with this absolute massive conviction and assertiveness in the moments where there's urgency and in the moments where you can really galvanize folks behind that. So it's a balance of occasionally absolutely doing that, but for the most part, it needs to absolutely be around driving motivation through empowering people to go out there and figure it out as you've set this path forward.
Yeah, I've long thought that if you tell somebody to do something, they might do it once, but the second time around, they're going to start looking around and thinking about what else they might be doing with their time. Like, smart, motivated people don't want you just shredding orders at them. Like, if they don't believe in the plan, you telling them to follow the plan is not going to work. Like, you have to be able to get people on board. Even if they don't agree with 100% of it, they have to believe in enough of it to do their best work. Otherwise, I don't know what you're doing. You're probably not leading and definitely not succeeding.
Yeah,
Okay. We want to make sure we have one more question we have to get to, Nick. Nick, what is our last question of the day?
All right, let's do this. We received this question from a founder. This founder said, "We are a seed stage company making our plan for next year. We've been told we need to triple revenue to be able to raise our next round, but that seems impossible. How do we pick a realistic goal and still be ready to raise money?" Ash, want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm having this conversation an awful lot right now, and there are some sore hearts out there for sure. So 3x annual growth is pretty much the minimum benchmark. And oftentimes the exciting companies, the ones that get a lot of demand, are going to have a good deal more than that. So if you're not on track for those kinds of goals, then you probably need to think about getting profitable as a much more realistic goal. Now, the usual response I get for that is, that's not possible. We're burning usually 80 to 120K a month. So we're burning $1 million a year and can't possibly cut that down enough and meet in the middle on revenue. But that's because you're going to have to cut your team members, almost certainly, along with many of your other significant costs. You're going to have to raise prices. So giving away your product, doing generous trials, all those kinds of things are probably going to have to go. And then you're going to have to focus on your most engaged customers. So you'll have to, at least for the near term, narrow down the vision and just focus on the lowest hanging fruit so you can improve your margins with those existing customers rather than having to spend a lot of time and money on new distribution. And that way, if you can get to profitability or at least extend your runway out significantly, then you can put yourself in a position of strength. You've got more time to wait until investors want you, and you've been able to achieve that exciting growth.
Wait, so Ash, when they're arguing with you, what do they expect the outcome of that argument will be? Like, they're like, I don't.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I work with people on a very close basis. So I have no problem with people being upfront with me and expressing their concern and desire for me to put in more capital. But yeah, I think that a lot of people expect, just because they were in school and university and those kinds of places, that where you do X, you get Y, and justice is served at all times. Obviously, outside of those environments, that's not how the universe works. And for many people, when they encounter that reality for the first time or one of the first times, it's rough.
Yeah, I hear that. I also encounter a bunch of companies, and I think the important thing to keep in mind is if you're getting advice that's saying 3x growth is required for investors, and you're like, my business can't do that. What you're really hearing is they're saying the companies that will raise the next round have 3x growth. They're not saying necessarily you have to somehow magically wave a magic wand and create 3x growth for your company. It might not be possible, but all that means is that you don't have a venture backable business, which is not a bad thing. I mean, not all businesses are venture backable, but it's not. I think people conflate the benchmark with guidance, and I don't think those things are the same. You have to take that benchmark, as Ash said, and decide, is 3x growth viable for us? If it's not, it just means we're not a venture backable company and we choose a different plan and a different path forward. There are companies that have
like
other
Microsoft, not venture backed.
Yeah, well, there you go. Exactly. Like you can be very successful. In fact, one of the fastest growing, largest software companies that I know of has never raised any, that I've been involved with, has never raised any venture money, mostly because venture investors didn't understand the business and it's just grown to be huge. You can do quite well with it. It just means that venture funding is not in your future. And by the way, I've found, at least if you're going to triple revenue, it's not because you found some sort of miracle crow. It's because the business really does have an engine and it's going to really grow on its own. And that's just a feature of venture-backed businesses. If you want to be venture-backed, go find one of those.
Sean, I think there's something to that. And as you both were explaining this, I was thinking about this. What is the difference between doubling your revenue versus tripling it? Is it simply a function of one business is venture backed and
it's not? 1x, Nick. You take the 2 from the 3.
That's so true.
Carry the 4.
I should have really thought about this question before launching in here. But seriously, so is it just a function of effort, tactics, market timing? What is it that differentiates a 3x versus a 2x in terms of planning, let's say?
Well, the pattern I would say often is how much they're spending on marketing, often ads. That is a frequent reason why people might be growing between 2 and 4x and the difference between those two things. And then customer satisfaction would be the other one, where the companies are doing really, really well and maybe they're not spending money on distribution. They're so satisfying for their customers that those customers are referring them aggressively, and that's driving very exciting growth. And obviously the latter is what you're really looking for.
Agreed. You can grow fast in a number of different ways. You can vastly accelerate customer acquisition. You can raise your price. You can make sure you have perfect customer retention. There's lots of ways you can get there. I think the key answer, though, is the reason investors are looking for 3x growth is that it's an indication that there is, regardless of all the mistakes you make and all the problems you have, that there is a core of something that can grow to be much bigger there. And essentially, despite all your problems, it's still succeeding. And that's what investors are looking for, is those sorts of engines. If you had to execute everything perfectly to be able to grow, that's actually not as robust of a business as everybody wants. We want it to happen despite all of the imperfections that exist in early stage companies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And speaking of imperfections, our podcast is not perfect, but we're very good about always ending on time, and we're coming up on that now. So let us spare everybody rants about annual planning and how much we love them or hate them or whatever, and put a feather in our cap of annual planning for this year. Ash and Nick, thank you for sharing your annals of annual planning.
Thank you for sharing your jokes, Sean. We always appreciate them.
I'm here to make you feel better about yourself by telling worse jokes. There you go.
Mission accomplished.
Very good. If you have a question you would like us to answer in a future episode, we would love to answer it. Please head over to thestartuphelpdesk.com or on X/Twitter at thestartuphd. We put these questions together from all that we get submitted, and we would love to answer your questions, so please send it in to us. But for now, the Startup Help Desk is closed. Good luck in building your business.